All right, good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delayed start. We had some technical difficulties on our end. So it is Thursday, September 21st, 2023, and this is the regular meeting of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. Ms. Contreras, would you please take the roll?
Commissioner Baker?
Here.
Commissioner Wilson?
Here.
Commissioner Wood?
Here.
Chair Matich?
Here. All right, let's go ahead and proceed to item 1, public comment for items not on today's agenda. Let's take the telephone public comment under item 1 first.
Hello, this is Petzold.
Go ahead, Mr. Petzold.
Yes, I'm calling in this morning regarding case 23-00359. I filed that earlier this year, and to my understanding, the investigation is complete. I would like to ask that the FPP staff complete and resolve the case and issue a final finding on this. The infraction was very, very minor regarding a statement of economic information, and the information had not been updated on the local agency's website to show that Trustee McGregor was required. So in the interest of justice and moving cases along at FPPC, I would ask that this case be resolved at the earliest possible moment in accordance with your current policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petzold. Do we have additional public comment on the phone line?
Yes, this is Dale Heldick. I'm calling in regards to case number 2018-01194. I called last month, and I've called several times throughout the year, and the common response that I usually get is very vague. It essentially just says that other than an email sent to me on March 8th, they don't have any additional information that can be provided at this time. It's my understanding that this has been just sitting in limbo for probably about a year now, and it's coming up on the 5-year anniversary of when this case was originally initiated. I see in the executive or the enforcement presentation that you guys will hear later today that 2018 cases have been dropping down, and we're now down to 48 cases left in 2018. But I'm afraid that this will be somehow dropped off the books and nothing will be done. And it was, to me, a very serious infraction of people using over $320,000 to influence a campaign, an election, and I'm hoping that we get a resolution on it. I would like to see the FPPC take do a prosecution on this case, because it is a very serious thing, and to have it sit here for this long a time is unacceptable. And so I'm hoping that both Mr. Bucknell and Mr. Burton can take a serious look at this and provide me a response, and not just additional information can't be provided at this time. So I'm hoping that you'll take a look at it and get back to me with a better answer than that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment. The commission has, I think, clearly expressed our frustration with some of the lengths of time it takes to resolve cases. And I'm confident that our Chief of Enforcement, Mr. Lindsay, has the case number now and will be looking into this as soon as he can. Do we have any additional?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment on the phone line? Very good. Hearing and seeing none, we'll proceed to item 2, approval of the August 2023 commission hearing minutes. Do any commissioners have edits or comments on last month's meeting minutes? Hearing and seeing none.
Move to approve? Yeah. Move to approve, please.
Second.
Any public comment on item 2? Hearing none. Ms. Contreras.
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wood?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
Motion passes.
We'll now proceed to our consent calendar, and today that's items 3 and 4. Do any commissioners wish to pull items from consent for separate discussion?
Chair Matich, I'd like to remove item 3, please.
All right, thank you. Any other commissioners wish to pull item 4, the only other remaining item? All right, the consent calendar today is just simply item 4 then. Let me invite our new Chief of Enforcement, Mr. Lindsay, to the table. Mr. Lindsay, item 4, it's our only consent item. Do you have any information you wanted to share with the commission before we proceed on item 4?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. James Lindsay, Chief of Enforcement. My understanding actually is that we wanted to talk about item 3, not item 4.
We're going to complete the consent calendar first, and then we'll go back. So the only item on consent is item 4.
And no additional comment on item 4.
All right, any questions for Mr. Lindsay on 4? Do we have a motion?
I move.
Second?
Any public comment? Hearing none, Ms. Contreras?
Commissioner Baker,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Matich.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, we'll now proceed with item 3 in the matter of Compton Community College District, FPPC number 22-795. Chief Lindsay, did you have any opening comments on item 3?
No, I do not have any opening comments on item 3, but very happy to answer any questions that the Commissioners may have.
All right. Commissioner Wilson?
Thank you, Commissioner. And first of all, I want to commend you and your staff for the extensive work on the stipulation and running through all the details. But the main reason I pulled this off of consent, I had some questions of the whole issue of whether the district staff and administrators were negligent or intentionally sent out this mailing. And I think you could make the case that it was negligent, but just based on the standard training that staff receive both at the local and state level, it's difficult for me to come to the conclusion that they had no knowledge that there was a mass mailing prohibition. And then when they went to the general counsel advised them, you need to cease sending out any additional mailings because of the mass mailing prohibition. So I think it would be helpful if you could just go into a little bit more detail how you came to the conclusion that their conduct was negligent and not intentional.
I think one of the main factors there with negligence is the high degree of cooperation that we received from the community college district through their attorney. They did discontinue the mailers very quickly after it was discovered that there was a violation. There was no difficulty in obtaining their compliance and not sending out what ended up being roughly 75% of the mailers that were produced. There's no indication that there was an intent to violate the law. I believe that they believed that the message that was being sent out was appropriate and within their purview to send. It just turned out to not be so.
And I know there was some reference in the stipulation about this, but could you just elaborate on what type of training they'll be doing moving forward so that this mistake is not repeated?
Well, we can't necessarily force anybody to undertake training, but this is a serious scenario. Their attorney certainly understands that it's a significant matter. We would have to believe that engaging in a stipulation, being fined close to the maximum, would be certainly incentive to make sure that they are looking at these things very closely before they are sent out and getting advice if it's necessary.
And this is just more out of my own curiosity. I know the brochure was referenced. Did the Enforcement Division get a chance to actually see the brochure, this color brochure that included information on the Board of Trustees and the fact that it was close to the upcoming election? Did you actually see the brochure?
Yes,
Okay.
we did.
Okay.
And we have, I have seen it personally also in digital format, not necessarily in my.
Well, sure,
attention.
right.
But yes, it's been seen. It was a well-done, so to speak, brochure with color photographs and whatnot. That's indicative of the cost that was, it was used to produce the mailers in question.
Okay. Well, you've answered my question. I'm not, I'm convinced by the, detailed work that the Enforcement Division did on this particular item. I'm still not convinced that it was negligent, but I'll accept the conclusion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilson. I had a couple questions, Mr. Lindsay. Actually, let me begin, though, with an observation. This is a case, based on the case number, that arose in 2022, and here we are just a year later, and you're coming to us with a resolution. So I want to acknowledge the quick work of staff in this matter to take a complaint, take a fact pattern, analyze it, and come to a resolution and present it to the commission. That's exactly what we've been asking for, so appreciate the work of enforcement.
Thank you for that, and the handling attorney, Arden particularly, is here, and this is exactly how we would like to say things moving forward, for sure.
So a couple clarifying questions, though, at least so I'm clear in my mind. On page 1, there's a reference to the complaint underlying the case was submitted anonymously. But on page 4, on line 1 to line 3, it says the district recognized the violation, discontinued further distribution of the letter, through their counsel notified the FPPC and sought advice from the legal division. So is this a case of the district recognizing something prior to contact from our agency and they've self-reported, or were they recognizing the violation after we pointed it out to them?
Well, it was initiated with FPPC through an anonymous complaint. When we reached out with the letter of inquiry 3 days later, we got an immediate response, and I mean within an hour of our email from their attorney indicating that they were in the process. They understood that there was a violation or believed that there was a violation and had discontinued. So there's a certain amount of giving somebody the benefit of the doubt that they were on the road already to self-reporting, but it is not technically a self-reporting case.
Okay, all right. And then my second question has to do with the population that the letter was sent to. At various places, well, on page 3, at the very first paragraph of summary of facts, it talks about the newsletter being sent to current and prospective students and residents of the district for the purpose of encouraging potential students to enroll for winter and spring. And so knowing that people who live outside the district would be eligible to go to school within one of the campuses within the district, can you tell us, was this, were the mail pieces that were sent out, were they limited to residents of the district, or were they actually sent out to folks that lived outside the district? And that's important, at least for my mind, because the harm we're talking about here is trying to use a public mailer to influence an election, which makes sense if you're sending it to residents. It makes a little less sense if you're sending it to a population that can't vote in the election.
Right, and so what we have here, of course, we've got a community college district that is Compton Community College District, but that's a little bit broader than the city of Compton. We have pieces of other cities that are also within the boundaries of that community college district. That community college district serves approximately 300,000 individuals. There were 131,000 mailers that were produced. If you look at the, average household size, it's pretty good saturation into their district, probably full saturation. You figure that the average household in that area is roughly 4 per person. And so you're looking at probably something like 75,000 households and 131,000 mailers.
Okay. So the inference being that you think most of those mail pieces were intended to go to individuals who would be eligible to vote in the district election?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then my final, well, I have 2 other questions, but I have 1 other question, but the last question on the STIP is, I noticed that you compare raw numbers here. You're using the raw numbers that were sent out, about 33,000 sent out to the district, with raw numbers that were of mailers that were sent out in the city of Upland, the city of El Monte. And so I wonder, when you're doing that, are you trying to equalize for the potential populations at issue at all?
Yeah, yeah, we are. They're not going to be perfect examples, but in this instance, they're not widely disparate either. The city of Upland, has like 75,000 residents. City of El Monte has a little over 100. This larger district territory is 300,000, so there is about a 3 times greater population for this particular case than the comparables, but those are good comparables, not only on the violation and the amounts, but the population. You do need to factor in the slight differences, but it's not out of reason to look at those populations and try to compare them.
Right. And then with respect to the 2 city matters that you reference as comparables, the fines respectively there were $2,000 and $3,000. And that, the $3,000 one, the city of El Monte, that was a circumstance in which the mayor had authorized, or excuse me, where there was, the mail piece included an inspirational message from the mayor, which seems a little more self-aggrandizing than perhaps what we're led here to believe the newsletter by the district did. So can you just give us a sense, why do you think in this case, 4,000 for the violation made more sense as opposed to 3,000 where there was an inspirational message included in the mail piece?
Yeah, for enforcement, it's all about the impending election. There was no impending election with the inspirational message in the city of El Monte. There was here. This mailer was sent out and contemplated to be sent out to everybody within 3 weeks of a general election in which it references 3 individuals who are on the ballot. And the amount of money here, this is still fairly a local small type of election, and we see all the time committees that don't raise this kind of money. It's a significant advantage to, in a scenario such as this, to put that kind of message out there and that kind of money being spent.
The district asserted that the purpose of the mail piece was to encourage enrollment for winter and spring. Do you know when enrollment opened for winter?
It would have been probably sometime in the early fall or late summer, just based upon my knowledge of the community college system. I don't know specifically here, but my guess is that it would be in late August.
Okay. All right. My final question, not necessarily related to this stip, but just more generally. We've had, and this is a good example of this, and that is you're describing mail pieces that themselves are a violation, right? But we don't have a copy of the mail piece attached to the stipulation. Would it be possible, in your mind, when we're resolving these matters, to include a copy of the mail piece as an attachment to the stipulation so that we can not just have the benefit of the description, but we can actually see it for ourselves? Is there any reason we couldn't do that?
I cannot think of any particular legal reason why it could not be attached in some way to the stipulation. Of course, any stipulation, there's a give and take between everybody, but I would not see any problem with having an Exhibit A, so to speak, to a stipulation such as this.
All right, well, I don't know if my colleagues would find it beneficial. I know I would, but Commissioner Baker. All right, Commissioner Baker, I know you had some questions.
Thank you. I do. Thank you for the good questions. And just to chime in, yes, I think we've felt in the past it is very helpful to see that if it's an attachment. Obviously, you're saying that's a stipulation. They got to go back and forth. But I think given what rules come ahead of us, I'd like to see that as well. So I would like to go back to the line of questioning that Commissioner Wilson started with, and that is looking at intent. And just by way of background, I think one of the first cases I was part of when I joined the commission was a public use, political use of public money case. It was the different fact pattern, but at that instance and since then, I feel the commission, and certainly this commissioner would like to reiterate, that this is a harm with a very low tolerance, if ever. And that's a feedback that I would give. I don't think there's an excuse in a city organized. There's plenty of training. It should be one of the most fundamental, 101 good government things to protect against. That little speech said, I'd like to go back to the question about intent, and that is how specifically, if you can keep it within the 4 corners of the document, did the attorney find out about this? Because in response to prior questions, you mentioned that it first came to the FPPC's attention through an anonymous complaint. FPPC contacted with the notice letter, and within an hour, the district attorney, district for the community college, said, we're already aware that something went wrong here. So they knew before you contacted them. How did the attorney find out? Or in the course of the investigation in any four corners here, how did the notice come? Because it's a little bit vague. It says the district, when it recognized the violation, discontinued further. So how did it come to recognize it?
The answer to your question is we're not 100% sure how the attorney became aware of it. It was just pretty clear from our communications that he was aware of it, and they weren't hiding the scenario and were attempting to cooperate. Otherwise I would be speculating, but
Okay.
that's what we know.
And also going to intent, I'd like to go back to some of the description on my second point. I think you pointed out that the Board of Trustees approved the budget that said there would be a newsletter. And correct me if I'm getting this wrong. They approved the budget that said there would be a newsletter, but they didn't know about this particular format or that they would be included. Can you clarify the level of knowledge that you're describing in here with respect to the Board of Trustees? I think a moment ago you actually said it was contemplated by everybody that there would be a newsletter. So I'm kind of want to drill down into that.
Yeah, I think the newsletter itself was always contemplated. They probably always send a newsletter trying to get prospective students to their school. That was largely what the newsletter was about. The problem was that there was a particular page in this
I understand.
newsletter,
Yeah.
and so contemplation of the newsletter itself, I think that was in the normal course.
Okay.
Putting the message directly from the trustee, congratulating the district, that was, I'm sure, contemplated on some level, but they just didn't. They didn't have they should not have written what they did and had the pictures of the individuals.
Thank you. So they knew that there was going to be a newsletter, and you're saying, kind of like I'm assuming, but that it's in the regular course, maybe they send it out all the time or on a regular basis. But they didn't know about they didn't approve this particular format. I see probably our enforcement point person nodding his head in the background that that's the case. That they didn't approve this particular one. That goes to my next point. I am, not a suspicious person, but been in government and politics enough to have a little bit of suspicion. It sounds like this was staff-driven. And there are scenarios where staff really prefers that one team of people win the board. They either like them or they really don't like the opponents. And a very suspicious person would look at this and see, especially with some of the vagueness with which the stipulation was agreed to, that the staff might have ginned this up saying, these are the people I want to favor, especially when the date is 2 weeks or a little bit over 2 weeks before an election. And after, from what you've told us, what would be the next registration period for students. So it's landing and saturating the mailboxes or the community college district right before an election, well after the closest time and proximity to registration, and is really highlighting 3 people who are on the ballot. For that reason, I am comfortable that you're close to the maximum. I think this is the kind of scenario where we wouldn't have much tolerance for below the maximum. Looking at the comparables, I can see why there were excellent questions by the chair about the amounts and looking at it. But given that there's not strong evidence to me that it was just a negligent, I don't think there's an excuse for it for a government entity, and it's that close to the election. I'm comfortable with having it higher. A little part of me would have thought, could you do 4,500? I know you have to negotiate these things. That's my feedback. That's why I intend to vote for this. In the future, if you're able to drill down more in the stipulated, negotiated, exactly how the chain of events find out, so they can look at, is this something that was just a really grossly negligent mistake on the part of staff as opposed to plans to influence who's going to run their board. I did actually have one more, and that is, can't we require training as part of the penalty? You mentioned that we can't force someone to do training. I feel like I wonder if we can actually make maybe we can't set up their procedures to do better in the future, but can we require training within a certain period of time?
I might defer on this one.
Hello, Galena West, Executive Director. Yeah, in the past, we've explored this with the commission as making it terms of settlement in certain instances where it seems like someone is just not educated or a whole district is not educated. So parts of the settlement themselves have required a certain training if we offer that certain training and there's a puzzle piece that fits there.
Mm-hmm. And in this instance, do we offer a training on the use of public funds in this way? I feel like I'm sure the AG's ethics training also includes that.
Yeah, I think it's in the general training, and we have a very explicit fact sheet that we have lots of details and examples. But as for a specific training, I don't think so. Dave's looking it up right now. But no, I don't believe so.
Thank you. And I don't know if Mr. Bainbridge is looking, but I am grateful. I remember that I think at least one stipulation, we've had some training that was in there. That's my feedback, is I do think these are a very serious harm. There are mitigating circumstances, of course, in the sense that they did, fess up right away. And stop the rest of the mailing. But given the proximity, intent is ambiguous to me. I am giving the feedback, this is the kind of case I would expect on the higher end. And I thank you for having a 2022 case before us before the next election.
Thank you,
Commissioner Wood, anything you'd like to add to the discussion?
Nothing to add. I tend to agree with the comments that have already been stated. I am in favor of this. I would have gone a little higher, or I would have been okay with a little higher also. And I would love the visuals when it's possible.
All right, thank you. At this point, I will move that we approve the stipulation presented in item 3. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any public comment on item 3? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Contreras?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wood?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes our consent calendar. We'll now proceed to our general items. And for item 5, we have, as folks know, we have a partnership with a community college district and to help us produce certain educational videos associated with the commission. And so we have Mr. Waringa and Ms. Baker from the City College of San Francisco here today to help show us our most recent Form 700 video. Mr. Waringa.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Jay Waringa, Director of Communications. You'll recall we began this partnership with Laney College in Oakland in 2021. The students provide us with new videos, and the students get some class credit and some real-world experience on their part. So first of all, I'd like to thank the co-chair of the department, Professor Steve Schliske, for his continued support and collaboration with us. It's kind of nice to have an Emmy Award-winning editor and producer working with us. You'll recall our first student, Susan Bradley, created the What is the FPPC videos, which we see rotating on our website, and our thanks to her. Our latest student, Liz Baker, comes to us through Professor Schliske's contacts with the City College of San Francisco and the Broadcast Electronic Media Arts Department. Liz is not only a freelance media developer and editor, she taught sound engineering and design for the Youth Next Gen program with the Bay Area Video Coalition. Also, for the past 7 years, she's taught drama, video editing, radio plays, and English for middle school students with disabilities. She's also run her own theater company for 5 years called Walnut Productions, where she produced, wrote, and directed live sketches, and also has extensive experience working on crews on sets for short films, TV shows, music videos, including a season of MTV's The Real World and TLC's 4 Weddings. Wow, how do you fit that all in? I don't know. In creating a new video, We looked at what topics are most asked of us, what topics are most frequently asked by the public. Form 700s are at or near the top of the list a lot of times, so I provided Liz with some basic information on it, and Liz created this video, The Basics of SEIs or Form 700s, and I believe, Elwin, if we can play that video now.
There are lots of forms out there, but this one is an important form for all Californians to know about. It's a Form 700, and every elected official and many other public officials and employees have to file them. It gives the public transparency about a public official's financial situation to make sure your leaders are making decisions that are best for you and not for them. Form 700, otherwise known as a Statement of Economic Interest, or SEI, spells out things like what public officials own, where they make their money, and certain investments. Every public official who makes or even takes part in a governmental decision, like, say, a contract, is required to file a Form 700. And there's another reason they fill them out, to remind them of conflicts they might have so they can avoid them, by recusing themselves or removing the financial interest so there's not a conflict. Form 700 gives information on certain types of income, investments, property, ownership of businesses, and it also requires public officials to list the gifts they received above certain thresholds. Things like dinners, bottles of wine, concerts, or ball games. And if they got trips or hotel stays, they also have to disclose some or all of those. Again, it's all to make sure the public knows who is providing what to a public official and assigning limits to it. Most of the time, they're filed where the public official serves, their local or state agency or district. Some file with the FPPC, like all the state legislature, governor, city council members, and county supervisors. For those that file with the FPPC, you can find many of them on our website. And remember, Form 700s are public documents. You have a right to see them. If a public official doesn't file one, or doesn't include everything they're supposed to, well, there can be penalties for that, and often are. Because you have a right to expect that your public officials are making decisions that are best for your interests, not their financial benefit.
And with that, Chair and Commissioners,
There are
Liz
lots of forms
Baker.
out there.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, thank you, Ms. Baker. We appreciate you being here, but more importantly, thank you for squeezing in this project in your busy life. It's a very impressive background and credentials. So thank you for your work, and thank you particularly for focusing on Form 700s. As the video correctly articulates, they are really an important part of transparency in California and ensuring that public officials abide by the conflicts rules and the general transparency rules. So as a token of our gratitude and appreciation, I'd like to present to you this certificate of appreciation from the FPPC, commissioners, and our staff. And thank you, Jay, again, for setting this up each year. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Our next item is item 6. This is our pre-notice discussion of proposed amendment to Regulation 18202, quasi-legislative administrative actions. And with us is Commission Counsel, Ms. Nutting. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Valerie Newton, Commission Counsel, here to present to you proposed amendment to Regulation 18202, which, as the Chair said, addresses quasi-legislative administrative action. It's hard to follow up such a lovely presentation, but this is pretty straightforward, so I'm going to keep things brief. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have at the end. As noted in the memo, it was brought to the attention of staff that there might be some confusion in the regulated community as to whether the California Citizens Redistricting Commission could be lobbied because of the unique function and formation of the agency. Given the importance of the role of the Redistricting Commission, we thought it best to make it very clear that the types of actions that the Redistricting Commission performs are the types of actions that the Act intends to address with lobbying rules and regulations. When deciding how to make that clear, we determined that the confusion likely wasn't whether the redistricting commission was a state agency or whether the officials were qualifying officials, because that seemed pretty simple and pretty clear as noted in the memo. Although I do lay it out so the commission could see. But rather, we thought the confusion was due to the nature of the work that the redistricting commission performs and whether that is the type of action that is contemplated, in the lobbying rules. Lobbying is the attempt to influence legislative or administrative action. We're focusing here on the administrative action. Now, that can be many things, including drafting rules and regulations, but it can also be quasi-legislative proceedings. While the Act doesn't have a general description or general definition of quasi-legislative proceeding or actions, courts have held that quasi-legislative action can generally be defined as acts that adopt rules of general application on the basis of broad public policy. For example, courts have time and time again found that rezoning decisions are quasi-legislative. Here, the redistricting commission isn't drafting legislation or regulations, but what they do has far-reaching implications for the entire state of California, as they're drawing district lines, which actually used to be a function of the state legislature. So not only does this meet the definition provided by the courts, as it applies generally on the basis of broad public policy, but we can also analogize the drawing of district lines to the drawing of lines for local zoning ordinances. And surely if drawing zoning lines is quasi-legislative, then drawing district lines that affect the entire state and the democratic process would also be quasi-legislative. By adding in a sentence to the regulations stating clearly that proceedings of the redistricting commission are quasi-legislative, we would clear up any confusion surrounding lobbying the agency. And I have just a couple of final notes here. First, there is a typo in the memo on page 3 that I wanted to address. It's on page 3 under proposed regulatory action. An earlier draft of the sentence that we added to the regulation was erroneously left in the memo. It doesn't change the outcome or the way that the regulation would be applied. It just takes out some unnecessary language for the sake of making a more succinct and clear regulation. There's not a ton of difference between the two, but I did want to note that there are slight differences and there was a typo there. And finally, I just want to note that given the confusion from the community was specific to the redistricting commission and the importance of their role and the uniqueness of their role and formation, we found it appropriate here to be quite specific to the redistricting commission and the regulation. And one of those reasons that this issue is only going to come up every 10 years, and we thought it'd be best to memorialize that in a regulation so that we're not trying to find out, or the community is not trying to find out what we said 10 years ago or 10 years before that. It's just there for everyone to find. We're not trying to reinvent the definition of quasi-legislative, just making it clear that the redistricting commission fits within the definition that already exists. This regulation is scheduled to come back to the commission in November for adoption, and at this time I welcome any questions or suggestions that the commission might have.
Thank you, Ms. Nudin. Appreciate your presentation. And I just want to compliment staff. I think this is a good example of identifying an area where there may be confusion or uncertainty in the regulated community and formulating a regulatory proposal to try and resolve that and bring greater clarity. On the merits, I think you're exactly right in your analysis. My only question is, I noticed that we're drawing this conclusion with respect to the California Redistricting Commission. What about all the local redistricting commissions? Do we have the authority to reach down and require folks who spend money to influence those bodies to register as lobbyists?
We do not have the authority to do that. The Act only regulates and has rules against state lobbying or in relation to state lobbying, so not local agencies.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Nudin. Yeah, go. You go.
Yeah, I have a related question because I was going to ask a similar question. Could the legislature initiate action that would put the amendment on the ballot to include local jurisdictions?
They have not as of yet.
No, they
But I'm
haven't,
in,
but is it feasible, or is that possible?
it's possible if the legislator wanted to amend the act, they can.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to get that on the record. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilson. Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. I had the same line of questioning thank you, gentlemen, for taking care of that out the gate. I also am very pleased to see this happen, and I'm pleased this is something we can do by regulation. And when this had come forward, either last year or the year before, we were looking at the possibility of legislation that was proposed in the California legislature that didn't move forward. I'm grateful that the team said, hey, wait a minute, we may not need to do this by legislation. So with that in mind, I did want to ask some sort of application questions, so it's illustrated in my mind, to see what it covers. If you have an organization an entity whose purpose is for something else, say they're a environmental group, and so they do environmental advocacy, maybe they do hiking and conservation, but they also expend, the threshold amount to influence the commission. The fact that they have a different purpose and they don't exist particularly as a lobbyist employer, or that's not the bulk of what they do, that doesn't matter. This threshold presumably would be triggered.
So this is just to clarify the lobbying, whether lobbying applies.
Okay.
And at this time, under the current rules that we have, lobbying doesn't, how do I want to phrase this? One moment.
No problem.
Until a person meets the qualifications for lobbying, it's not lobbying.
Yeah.
So that's where the rules stand as of now. And so unfortunately, unless they met the qualifications of lobbying, no, it wouldn't necessarily apply.
And that qualification, as you described mostly on page 2 to 3, is that you're receiving as payment $2,000 or more in a calendar month, or whose principal duties are to communicate with an elected official, agency, or otherwise. That's a primary
That's
threshold you need to meet. So $2,000 is sticking in my mind. Okay.
That's the main definition.
So if an entity like an organization I just gave the example of, they expend $2,000 and they're getting funding over $2,000 for all the work that they do, would that trigger it? And I'm careful because I know we need to be open-minded. It's a very hypothetical situation I'm giving, but I'm really trying to put some meat on the bone to understand this. Who might be covered and who might not. We're looking at Mr.
I'm going to
Bainbridge.
defer to Mr. Bainbridge on this.
There's a lot of eyes on me right now. Yes, so with lobbying, once you meet the threshold, no matter who you're lobbying at the state level, if you meet that threshold, you become a lobbyist. And then any attempts to influence government officials for the I messed it up. Any attempts to influence state officials will be considered lobbying. So you could be lobbying and qualify another agency, but then it sounds like the scenario you're getting at, they're lobbying other entities, say the legislature, but then they do decide to do a little bit of lobbying of this commission. That would be reportable even if it's not $2,000 to lobby the specific agency.
Okay, very helpful. Yeah, I'm thinking of an organization that deputizes one of their staff and said, redistricting's coming up. I want you to lead the effort to advocate for the maps and do polling, and you pay for data and otherwise. So they're expending those funds, but that organization is getting funding. This person's job may be already there, and I didn't know if that triggers them. It's in that setting. It's not volunteer. You're being told to go do it, and it's your job, and you're getting paid for it. I feel like that would trigger it.
Yeah, and that's, if it's an in-house employee, it's a little bit different standard. It's how much of their compensated time do they spend on lobbying activities.
Interesting. Okay.
Just as a point of clarification, so we're all clear, we're not changing the lobbying
Yes.
thresholds
No.
at all. So you could take any state entity and run the hypothetical. We're simply saying CRC is now subject to the standards that have existed for some time.
Right. It has been. We're just clarifying for sure that it is.
Right. No, I agree. I appreciate the clarification. Lobbying rules were not my background coming to the commission, so these are still, I'm always in the feeling like I'm in the 101 context. Okay. And, I guess my next question is, assuming this is adopted in November, which I look forward to, open to the public comment on it, what education and outreach, and we can hear this in November perhaps, might be appropriate, because this is something that comes up every 10 years, and it's going to be a few more years before that happens. I know there's work that the CRC does, during that 10-year cycle, but the bulk of it is after the next census, and that's many years away. We all might be winning the lottery by then, but would we just assume this is part of the lobbying training, either at a future meeting in November or here, what might be the way in which we get the word out that this is happening next time, so they're ready for it?
I'm happy to look into that and see where we could slide it in.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Okay, thank you. And again, I'm grateful. I'm very pleased to see this going forward. I'm sorry we can't do it at the local level. Encourage us to move forward with this expeditiously.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Commissioner Wood, any comments, questions?
Yeah, I wish I were there in person. I wish I had medical clearance to go, because this is so fun to geek out on, because we're right at the early part of my syllabus in administrative law when I teach Londoner and bimetallic. And so anyway, I appreciate your work in this. I kind of went around in circles thinking, like, do we want to actually limit our definition of what this agency does to be quasi-legislative? But I think it's correct that that's what we want to do, because it's not quasi-judicial, or quasi-adjudicative, right? It's not a discrete question. It's not deciding between two parties who have a precise interest in it. So I think saying that it's quasi-legislative is fine. However, I'm interested that you said we're not changing the definition of quasi-legislative, because I was looking actually at the CRC's enacting statute, or enacting, I guess it was a referendum, right? In this thing that it puts out, these maps that it puts out, it says that they are subject to referendum in the same manner that a statute is subject to referendum, which is very powerful. So what they're putting out is much more powerful than regulation, is kind of my take on it, though I haven't taken a deep dive. Though I would think that it would only make it more obvious that what they're doing is quasi-legislative. So I think we're fine there, but I do think that we're kind of adding a little texture to what quasi-legislative is according to the courts, because the courts have defined it in much broader context. It's just kind of broadly applicable, right? But I think we're okay there. So that's kind of a comment I'd like to hear your thoughts on. But then the second thing is, in the language that we're adding here, and I guess you all decided this is the right place to put it, and I'm fine with it, but what is the court's inference going to be that only the California Citizens Redistricting Commission is named here as being quasi-legislative? What does that mean for all other commissions? So that's like that expressio unius canon of statutory construction. And I'm guessing you guys talked about that too, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But if there's a way to phrase it such that we don't want that kind of inference being made that what other commissions are doing is not quasi-legislative just because this one was named, that might be helpful. But anyway, I'll be quiet.
No, that's okay. So I'll start with the question, because I think that's the shorter part of this response. Our rationale for singling them out, in a sense, is that there's not really, there is no other agency or commission like them. They are so unique. And we are creating our record here about why we're doing that. And it's not saying that nothing else could be quasi-legislative. It's just saying this specifically is, because it is so unique. And until you do more analysis, it doesn't fit tightly into anything. You need to do that analysis. We've done it, so we're providing to you that this specifically is. And that ties into what you brought up earlier about it has the same force as statute, which is very powerful. But when you're looking at where it would fall in the scheme of lobbying rules, it's not quite legislative. They're not going through the legislative process, even though it is a very powerful thing that they're doing. They're also not drafting regulations. So we're looking at where they would fit. And this is a very broad definition. And while what they do is maybe even more powerful than any other quasi-legislative act that we can think of, it still fits within that broad definition. And it gets us where we want to go, that people understand this is lobbying, and it does fit within our lobbying rules.
So I actually have a follow-up to Commissioner Wood's point, because I think Commissioner Wood's point, and I take her at her word, that the enacting statute for the CRC made it clear that the maps produced by CRC would be subject to referenda, is about as close to being dispositive on the question of it being a legislative act as you can get, other than an express statement that it's legislative. Because under basic California constitutional law, you can only use referenda and initiative to control legislative acts. So you couldn't, unless you were trying to amend the Constitution, you couldn't expand referenda to something that wasn't clearly legislative. So to my mind, there's no question that this is legislative, and you're right on that point, or quasi-legislative. I think Commissioner Wood does raise an interesting point, though. It's like, since we named specifically the CRC, how does that bear on our determination with respect to another agency and their actions being quasi-legislative? So I don't know if we would benefit by having some catch-all in C that makes it clear that B does not otherwise limit our ability to determine whether other agencies' actions are quasi-legislative. Something to that effect, so it's clear, because I think you're right to call them out specifically, given the unique mission that they serve. But I do think Commissioner Wood's right. If you really want to ensure that a court looking at this, 10, 15 years from now doesn't draw a conclusion we wouldn't want, that having that clarifying language is a good idea.
I think we can do that pretty easily.
I mean, does anybody disagree with that? That's a really good point, Commissioner Wood.
Yes.
Sorry, Commissioner Wood, I sort of jumped in there. Do you have more?
No, I was just going to say thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Nuding?
This is kind of more of a general question, Chair Matich. When you talk, following up on Commissioner Wood's questions and statements in terms of quasi-legislative bodies, there are some commissions that, just based on my experience, I know they get lobbied. For example, the PUC, the Energy Commission. So how would we distinguish the redistricting commission from those entities?
Interestingly enough, somewhere along the line, the legislature did add something specific to the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, for those not familiar with the acronym, that said, in the context of the PUC, this is quasi-legislative. So I guess we're not the first to want to make it clear about one agency. But I think on a broader level, how do we, address that? Is quasi-legislative is defined, and I think in most of these agencies, we see it a little more clearly. It happens on the day-to-day. It's constantly occurring, right? Here, it happens every 10 years, and I think when it comes about, people scramble a little bit. Well, what do we do with this? And hopefully this will help with that confusion. Does that answer your question?
Oh, that's okay. Thank you for the clarification.
All right. Any more questions for Ms. Nuding? All right. This is pre-notice, so we will not have a motion today, but let me call for public comment. Is there any public comment on item 6, our pre-notice discussion of amendments to Regulation 18202? Is there any public comment on item 6? All right. Sounds like there's no public comment on item 6. This will return to the commission for adoption in November. So, Ms. Nuding, thank you very much for your work on this, and we will see you in November. All right, we'll now proceed to item 7. This is our legislative update, and we will welcome to the table our senior FPPC Legislative Counsel, Ms. Nakano, who hasn't been very busy at all. It's just happy end of session for you too, Ms. Nakano.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Lindsay Nakano, Senior Legislative Counsel. All right, the legislature has recessed for the year. 6 commission-related bills passed in the legislature, including 2 commission-sponsored bills. I believe in total this year there were 22 commission-related bills, so quite a cutback overall. All right, SB 29 by Senator Glazer relating to the Commission's Political Reform Education Program passed in the legislature 79-0 in the Assembly, 39-0 in the Senate. The bill is now with the governor and awaits his decision. SB 678 by Senator Umberg, adding a disclaimer requirement for paid posts by third parties on social media, passed 69-0 in the Assembly, 38-0 in the Senate. It was signed by the governor. That bill will take effect January 1st of 2024. AB 868 by Assemblymember Wilson relating to the Data Act was made into a 2-year bill by the Appropriations Committee, so that journey will continue. On to other commission-related bills. AB 37 by Assemblymember Bonta, allowing broader use of campaign funds for security expenses, passed in both houses, 35-3 in the Senate, 75-0 in the Assembly. That one is also currently with the governor. AB 334 by Assemblymember Rubio relating to Section 1090 and independent contractors, also passed in both houses, 38-0 in the Senate, 75-0 in the Assembly, and that is also with the governor. AB 421 by Assemblymember Bryan requiring top funders determined at the time of the qualification of the measure to be listed in the ballot pamphlet for referendum measures, passed 39 in the Senate and 55-17 in the Assembly. That bill was signed by the governor, so it will become law starting January 1st. SB 681 by Senator Allen, shortening the time that PRA bills must be in print before final voting by the legislature, passed 61-18 in the Assembly and 32-8 in the Senate. That one also awaits the governor's decision. So many bills were held in the Appropriations Committee or made into 2-year bills during hearings on September 1st. Those bills are listed at the end of the report, but I'd be happy to talk about any of those if anyone has questions. And last, a little look ahead. In October, I'll update the commission on the governor's actions on the remaining bills. And in November, I will be presenting legislative ideas for 2024. That concludes my update. Happy to take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Nakano. Any questions for Ms. Nakano on her legislative update?
No, but just to thank you for it's the work that you do anyway, but thank you for the work monitoring all these bills, the back and forth with the offices. From the numbers that you mentioned, we had a lot of great bipartisan bills, and that's what we aim for, usually reaches a better balance that way. So you're the one who executes the details of that for the most part, and we're grateful for it.
Thank you.
Just want to add a thank you as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Nakano. Any public comment on Ms. Nakano's legislative report? That is item 7. Hearing and seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Nakano.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and proceed to item 8, our executive staff reports, and we will begin with our enforcement division. I will welcome Mr. Lindsay back to the table. And as part of his enforcement division report, he also today has a presentation for us. It is our first update on the division's progress with respect to the policy directives the commission adopted in January of this year. So welcome, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners, again. Yes, we will be, I wanted to augment our presentation in the executive report regarding our, the policy directives quarterly progress report. Before I get into the substance of this, although this is my presentation, this is mostly due to the work of our great enforcement staff, and specifically I'd like to thank Assistant Chief Burton, who led this up till August 28th when I took over. I think we're going to be talking about some good things today, generally speaking, and just want to make sure that they get a shout out for the work that they've done. We do have the PowerPoint. Thank you. And I was told to be patient with this to make sure that we are on the same page. I wanted to just briefly go over the various directives. That's not, okay. We have what I would call 3 results-oriented directives based upon what was put into effect in February. We've been directed to reduce the number of pre-2023 cases by 75% by no later than the end of next year. Number 2, we've been asked to reduce our carryover cases as quickly as possible to the number of 625. And then also in a later section, we've been asked to create a general rule that we have a 2-year life cycle for cases. We'll talk a little bit less about that today because of the 7 months that we've had the directives and a 2-year timeframe. There's not a lot of data to really talk too much about that, and there's separate reporting on that, and we will talk about that a little bit later. And of course, within Section 1, we are directed to provide these quarterly progress reports, and this is the initial progress report that we will have done. Going into the substance, the next slide, just generally, this will show our case closure comparison data in graph form. And the reason that we are looking at February to August specifically is we wanted to make sure we were comparing apples to apples, what has happened since the directives and what happened in the 2 previous years during that same exact time frame. And what you can see from the red line in the graph, which is the 2023 time frame, closures are happening at a much greater pace since the directives than they were in the 2 years prior. And I think what's really important to the graph, it shows more of a straight line, which I think indicates that that is kind of a focus of enforcement right now, to work on case resolutions. Every month in the February to August range, there have been at least 80 case closures, and that was really more the exception in the previous 2 years. There were scenarios where that occurred, but it's every single month has been more than 80 since the directives were put into place. Now we'll move on to the first directive, which is the reduction of pre-2023 cases by 75%. I want to hit this too many times, but it doesn't seem to be responding. There we go. So there's a lot of data on this particular slide. Where we were at the beginning of the year was that we had 1,415 cases. That was our carryover total, but that was all cases that were pre-2023. So we're looking at a baseline of 1,415 cases. And you can also see on the chart next to it, there's a list by year as to how those cases broke down between years 2016 through 2022. Today, we have 924 of those cases, and that relates to a 35% reduction of those cases over the past 7 months. So again, if you look over in the chart, you can see the numbers that we had at that point in time of the various years and where we are now. There's been a total of 491 that have been closed. And our focus has been heavily on older cases between 2016 and 2019. And I think what you can see there is that our success rate in closing those cases has been a little bit higher than the 35%. It's really closer to 50% over those particular years. Of course, we're focused on proper resolution of every case, but we're really looking at some of the ones that have been around a while. The number of closures, case closures that we need in order to reach the 75% mandate would be 570. So a little bit more than the 491 that have been closed. So I would say we're slightly under pace, but we are very hopeful that the directive will be achieved by the December 31, 2024 timeframe. I think that's a realistic scenario, and it's one that we are striving to achieve and are hopeful that we will achieve.
Mr. Chair, may I inquire, is this, because we're at a certain spot, I just have, I think, a fairly quick question, but should we wait till the end? What is more conducive?
I'm happy.
Why don't we get
Keep
through
going?
it? and
Yep,
then
you
come
got
back?
it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move to the next slide, which relates to data related to Directive 2, which again is carryover cases in the attempt to get to 625. And we'll go back again to the baseline, which was the 1,415 number. That's the number of carryover cases we had at the end of last year. At the end of August of this year, if that had been December 31st, we'd have 1,191 carryover cases. So we are maybe a little more successful on the first directive so far, but this is significant progress. This is a reduction of 224 overall cases. That's roughly 30 a month over the time period in question. Again, our focus has been on the older cases, 2016 to 2019, and our focus has been on resolution of matters involving inadvertent or minor violations so that we can try to get our numbers to a more manageable number per attorney. What I would call the road to 625, we have a short-term goal at the end of the year of 1,000. That's a goal. That's what we're hoping for. That is ambitious, though. It's a number that would require net closures at a higher rate than we have been handling them. But we have, great focus on this, and we have additional personnel, and we're hoping that that would be a number that we can achieve by the end of the year. The longer-term goal is a little bit trickier because there are impediments in the intervening timeframe. We've got a presidential election coming up next year, and it would be likely that incremental closures are a little bit more difficult than the ones that have been closed on cases that already exist. But our long-term goal is that we will be, by the end of 2025, that we would be able to reach that 625 goal. And we'll look at also whether 625 is the exact optimal number, and maybe discuss that in the future as well. As I indicated, we'll talk about a little bit further. We do have some additional staff, and that would mean that there would be more carryover cases, more likely potentially because there's more staff to carry them over. But we'll see whether or not that's the number that makes the absolute most sense. But it's a number that does make a good amount of sense right now, and it's the number that we are looking at, obviously, to try to achieve as quickly as we can. And then lastly, the Directive 3, which is the 2-year life cycle of a case. This has its own special reporting within the directives. It's asked for a biennial report instead of a quarterly report. We haven't done one of those either, but we will in January. That's what you should expect, that we will provide a report at that time. And there's a lot of data that's been requested through the directives on that, and that's listed in this slide, such as the total number of complaints and referrals received, cases, investigations opened, cases referred, the average monthly rate of cases and investigations opened and closed for each part or each class of enforcement staff, and any explanation for differences in performance. We'll be looking at, as requested, not only this year, but comparing it to 3 prior years, 4 years total, which is a little bit broader than the case closures data that you saw earlier. But we will be looking at the 4-year comparison as required. Again, our focus continues to be on case reduction directives, largely because it's my feeling that case reduction will naturally affect the life cycle of future cases. The fewer cases you have, the more likely you can get through quickly cases that are newer. And then finally, looking forward, again, we'll continue to focus on resolving and moving the older cases forward, whether that is through settlement, through PC, or hearing if necessary. But we want to make sure that we are moving those cases forward one way or the other. We do have intake process refinements. Assistant Chief Burton, who was acting chief, he's now full-time handling intake matters. So we are seeing an increased effectiveness already at the intake level because he's full-time now in that particular area. So we're seeing increased effectiveness in the 3 and 14-day timeframes. There's a lot of verbal processes and that will be getting turned into written guidelines on the intake processes. And we want to look forward to that as the inception when we're looking at the 3rd directive of the 2-year life cycle. We don't want to overload the prosecution side too much when they already have a lot of cases. So I want to make sure that they are still focusing heavily on reducing case numbers. But we can look at both the intake and the investigation side to start looking a little bit more frequently at, let's get some stuff together to make sure that we are achieving that 2-year life cycle when we can. We have additional personnel starting or has started in September and October. Intake has an additional staff services analyst and a new attorney. And prosecutions has 2 new attorneys starting at the end of the month. And then there's a posting for a 3rd attorney, and hopefully that individual will be hired and started by the end of October, perhaps. That would be the hope. So in a nutshell, there's work to do still, but I think that we are on the road to success. We certainly are making progress on these directives, and hopefully that was helpful, but certainly we'll answer any other questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chief Lindsay. I have found this very helpful. And let me just begin by echoing your comment earlier, the kudos that I think we owe Assistant Chief Burton. You look at the numbers and from early in this year, and Assistant Chief Burton, I think, played an integral role in getting the number of case closures up through the first portion of the year before you started here. So kudos to Mr. Burton for his work. Question on its slide 3, case closures comparison data. Just out of curiosity, I noticed we're pretty consistent in 2021 and 2023. There's a dip starting in July down to August, and I don't know if I'm just curious. It is an almost parallel dip that time of year, so like what is it about that time of year? Is it vacations or is it something else? I'm just curious.
Let me look at the data here. I happen to have it in the written form okay, thank you very much for bringing the slides back up. Let me move that back so everybody has the benefit of looking at this, including myself. So the dip in, I'm sorry, Chair Matich,
July and August.
July and August.
Look at the gray and the red. It's almost parallel.
Yeah, and it's probably vacations, to be honest with you. I don't know the specific reason for that, but as you know, it's very common for individuals to take vacation in the summer. I would imagine, it's almost exact as you said. I think that's probably the best explanation for that.
Okay, so we should expect to see that trend pretty much every year.
I think I would, yeah. Although in fairness, that's not what the scenario was the year prior to that. That's an upward shift in this over that same time frame. But it doesn't surprise me that there's a slight downturn for that month.
Yeah, all right. So moving to the next slide, slide 4. I want to again recognize the work staff has done since January, focusing on the old cases. I mean, you have almost halved many of the older cases in that period of time. So that's excellent work. My question for you, one of my questions is of the 491 pre-2023 cases that you did close, can you give us a sense of what was the breakdown of those resolutions? We certainly haven't seen 491 stipulations before us, so how are we resolving those matters?
Yeah, so for case resolutions since the directives, February through August, we have had 60 stipulations.
And you're including, when you say that, you're including Streamline, right?
I am including Streamline. That's a total amount of stipulations. That's correct.
All right.
We've had 467 warning letters. We've had 87 no action closure letters, 55 administrative terminations, 45 individuals or entities completed prep, and there were 2 duplicate cases.
All right. When you say administrative termination, what do you mean there?
Committee that hasn't had activity for a good period of time. I don't remember the exact definition of that. But it's an older non-active committee.
So we just couldn't take action at that time? I mean, I'm just trying to understand when we have 55 admin terminations, what does that mean?
Galena West, Executive Director. Actually, it's pretty common because as we get referrals, we find out some committees are defunct. So the regulation gives certain criteria that if it has less than a certain amount of money and it hasn't been active for a while, that, excuse me, instead of trying to recreate that committee and get them up to date, we close the committee administratively to take them off everybody's books and to show that it was a defunct committee and nothing that needed to be prosecuted.
Okay. So it is not, for example, something where a case just sat there and the committee became defunct. If it's, the referral came at a time when the committee was already old, is what you were saying.
Generally, that is the case.
Okay. All right. Staffing, another point I want to make, the reductions that staff have accomplished to date, which have been substantial. I know we talked about adding 7 or 8 new positions to enforcement in the most recent budget, but my understanding is we don't have all of those positions yet. So is it accurate to understand that you've accomplished that reduction before we've even had the full measure of additional human resources that we got in the last budget cycle?
Yes, that is largely correct.
And about how many positions remain unfilled from that pool that we got in the last budget?
We have 1 attorney position still that is not filled, and we have a staff services analyst, and I think maybe a political reform consultant.
Okay, so like 3, maybe 4 positions still?
Yes.
Okay. And then my last question is, I appreciate the update on the various aspects of the policy directives. One thing I didn't, and I might have missed it, but the policy directives had some substantial direction on establishing deadlines in the division, because we did hear and understand that frequently there may have been suggestions to get work done by a certain time frame, but there were no actual deadlines imposed in many cases. So how are you and the staff doing on identifying areas where deadlines would be helpful and implementing those?
Yeah, so for me personally, I've been in the job for a little less than 4 weeks. What I am trying to do is educate myself through the approval process and looking through cases as they come in, which I've done extensively, to figure out where certain clogs, if you will, are to help determine how we can, as a division, get things through in a more efficient, manner. So that's primarily what my focus has been, so that I can understand the processes. It's hard to start making changes and things of that nature if you don't really understand what's happening. So I've really endeavored strongly to get through my approvals and look deeply into a lot of those cases to figure out, hey, why is this case sticking around for 4 years, or what the situation might be.
All right, so that's an area of the policy directives that really there's yet to be, understandably, yet to be done, and we can expect to be updated on that in the future then.
Yes, that's correct. And what I tried to indicate at least is that that is in the process of being done, especially at the intake level, because that's kind of where I think we want to start, making sure that we are opening and handling a case well at the beginning, because there's a lot of pressure on the back end right now. There's a lot of cases. We want to make sure that we are prosecuting those cases. They already exist, and getting proper resolutions on those cases. And so I've really focused the timing and guideline issues a lot on the front end right now, because with Chief Burton, or Assistant Chief Burton, taking over intake and the additional staff that's there, and quite frankly, the changes that have occurred, generally speaking, in intake, we're really looking closely at that right now, making sure that gets set up in the proper way.
All right, great. Thank you, Chief Lindsay. Appreciate it. Those were my questions. The commissioners have questions for Chief Lindsay. Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Also, I want to echo the gratitude to Mr. Burton for the work, and which includes coming, before the commission, where we're picking apart everything. So we're recognizing that and grateful for it. Thanks for the work, and we're seeing some of the actual impact you've had in a short time. So I want to express my gratitude for that. I think I'll pick up on where the chair was. He started to go with a similar question related to the deadlines and what I refer to also as milestones. And you may not be able to make this observation yet, it sounds like not, but that part of that establishing the deadlines is where where in the back end, as you referred to it, not in intake, those milestones are not getting reached, and that we'll get a report, maybe it'll be in the next update on what you're starting to identify. So I guess I'm saying that and not asking a question. And your last point about how there is a focus on intake, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'll try to ask it this way. Would the focus that you're referring to on intake mean that a case that pre-guidelines that we adopted that would have been opened and from intake may now not get opened? Can you say more about what you mean by the focus being on intake?
Yes, and I definitely did not mean to imply that we will be opening less cases. The case is either one that needs to be opened or not opened. But what we are seeing is inability to get through complaints and make some determinations in a more quickly, in a quicker fashion. We are utilizing the needs more time letter much less frequently right now than my understanding is what we were using before. So we're getting through those processes better. We have attorneys now in intake, and they're able to look at matters at the inception to determine whether or not that case should be fully opened or whether or, you know, what level of prosecution that needs to occur at. So there's just a lot of things that we're looking at and implementing, but it has nothing to do with not recognizing meritorious complaints.
Something needs to be open, it's got to be open. Yeah, gotcha, okay. I figured that was the case, wanted to kind of get that out there. And I think this might go back a little bit to the milestones, deadlines, questions before I move on. And during the public comment and deliberations that we had on the guidelines, some of the feedback that we received, I think internally, was that there were sometimes multiple levels of review for something. And, you know, I can't remember if one said 9 levels of review at this stage, or I got to keep going back and forth. And you may be getting to, it sounds like you're working on where are the things that slow things down, but I guess I should ask, is that also on your radar, or can I just re-up that one? Because I know I'll be interested come the next report on if you have identified expediting levels of review that may not be necessary. That really stuck out in my mind from the feedback we received internally during the deliberations.
Yeah, that's definitely on my radar.
Right.
As I look through cases that ultimately are coming to me now, I look through what has occurred in those cases. In most instances, I look at the levels of review, whether that was effective, whether it wasn't. Okay. And so, yes, that is definitely something that I'm looking at.
Great, I appreciate that. A moment ago, you mentioned something about if, in the context of carryover, if we have more staff, then there could be more carryover because there's more people to carry over cases, which I certainly understand that point. But I'm also thinking that if you have more people, then there might be less carryover because there's more people chipping away at what's there. Can you address that? Because that point stuck out in my ears as well.
Yeah, I mean, I look at things like what is an optimal caseload for an attorney, for instance, and that number. I'm still trying to figure out as I see some of our enforcement attorneys with disparate caseloads, and I can get a feel for, what the really good level is where cases are really getting moved. They're getting looked at on a regular basis versus perhaps an attorney that's overloaded, has a lot of cases, and there's only so much time in the day. So when I think of optimal carryover, I think of what is the proper case number that an attorney, for instance, might have. And that number might be 40, it might be 50, it might be 60. And if we have 13 attorneys versus 9, that might have an effect on what I would think at least might be a proper carryover number. But you're right, there's also a factor of you have additional people that could lead to lowered numbers in total as well. And we'll just kind of have to see how that plays out, I think.
That'll be the question I'm sure I will ask come either the next report or the next time when there's been enough data and we have a fuller load of folks, and I'll be looking for that trend, which is with more people, are we seeing not only a reduction in the pre-2023 cases, but a lower carryover cases. So thank you for addressing that one.
You're welcome.
And this, I think, goes to 1, 2, 3, on slide 4, where you mentioned directive number 1 is the 75% reduction in cases. You make the observation that this is slightly under pace. You know, this is new stuff. I understand a lot of things going on. Any other observations you can make just from your 4 weeks here and in your look at the last 7 months, 6, 7 months, what may have contributed to the pace, or it just might be this is sort of like startup time and that the pace may up as people get used to it? I just want to invite you to any other observations that you might see attributing to the slightly under pace point.
Well, I think that the pace that has been placed in the first directive, I mean, that's fairly ambitious to say that we're going to reduce a caseload that existed at that time by 75%. I mean, that's a significant ask, right? And so just because I say that it's slightly under pace, I don't mean that in any sort of negative way. I think that the Enforcement Division has done a great job of trying to reduce that number. Yes, we are a little bit under pace compared to that 75%,
Okay.
but I'm being very relative there. I want to make sure that, you know, that's a significant ask. And so for us to be just slightly under pace, I think is, generally speaking, a really good place to be.
Great, I appreciate that, and the report. I'm grateful that we have a regular check-in on this and know that it's a new regime of having these type of metrics so public and happening. I'm grateful they're happening, so thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Baker. Commissioner Wilson?
Yes, thank you, Chair Matich. First of all, I'd like to also just reiterate, since I've joined the commission, it's real clear how hard the Enforcement Division works, and, you know, very competent staff. They do extraordinary work. But from the outside looking in, it's hard to justify to the public, well, this case took 5 or 6 years. And what would be, you know, your advice in terms of how we address that issue, not only as a commission, but just as, you know, as the FPPC?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, I will repeat something that I've repeated internally a little bit, and that is the directives are a great kickstart, but they are an inward-facing solution to what is at least partially an outward-facing problem, meaning that we have to make sure that the regulated public takes us seriously and that we are moving cases forward. And there does have to be a little bit of a culture shift in the sense that we need to make sure that it is understood that we are going to move forward with prosecutions very quickly, that we aren't necessarily going to take no for an answer, or that we are going to delay significantly in settlement negotiations and things of that nature, that we are going to try to move things quickly, and that will have the I would hope the byproduct of causing individuals to come to the table much more quickly, try to resolve matters. The idea that I would want to put forward is that today is the best day for you to come to the table and try to resolve your matter. And that, I think, is really the issue that we have, more so than delays internally and whatnot. I think that we just have to do things perhaps in a way that causes the individuals that we are dealing with to want to work with us to resolve matters. When you don't work with them, and if we allow things to stagnate, they will naturally stagnate. That's really just the way that it is. So we have to just make sure that we are engaging with people and we are forcing them to engage with us.
Related kind of question. When there's a high-profile case, what is your view in terms of how those high-profile cases can be expedited, or should they be expedited?
The answer to that, in my opinion, is that those cases, though high profile, should be treated much the same as any other case, that there should be an impartial and efficient way of doing things. I think that we should be handling things in a way that we would, if anybody looked at any of the cases that we handled, high profile or not, that we would be handling them in a way that the public would think that, hey, that's the right way of doing things. Naturally, anytime there's going to be high profile material coming your way, there's going to be attention to that. But I would try not to, as a division, as a policy, to treat that case significantly different than any other case.
Commissioner Wilson. Commissioner Wood, any questions for Chief Lindsay?
Actually, no. I've just appreciated everything everybody raised, and I wish you luck, Chief Lindsay, and continuing to try to meet these goals and adjust them as needed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Wood. Any other commissioner comments?
The only one I have may go at the end, but since we're on enforcement, when we get calls and inquiries, either during public comment, such as today, about this case and it's been going on a long time, just again, we got one side. Is it appropriate to say now, perhaps it's later, and what happens next when those come at public meetings, that somebody maybe goes and looks into it, or is that you? Or can you just comment on that, since we did receive that during public comment period?
Yes, anytime that somebody, calls in with a matter that will be looked at immediately. And in fact, it was looked at the last time when he called last time, and there was an email that went out. You can't necessarily give an individual a bunch of material. I mean, some of these cases are still being actively investigated. I don't know that specific case where we are, but I will say that just because a case is older doesn't mean that there isn't active things that are going on in the case, and we may not be able to divulge that stuff. We did communicate, and that would be our policy always moving forward. I think that's been our policy, certainly would be my policy, and we will communicate again, but I can't promise that on that specific case that the response will be any more satisfactory than it was the last time we communicated.
Mm-hmm. As a commissioner, I wouldn't ask to know too much more about the particular part, but, writ large, that's kind of the response. And, this has been a comment I've made probably in the last 2 annual enforcement reviews, or a question, and it goes to when a respondent calls to check in about where something is, if there's a standard policy for what is an allowed response, or even that every 6 months we proactively say we're still looking at it. And in fairness, I've gotten a little bit different answer each year, that we proactively tell people every 6 months where things are at. I'm not so sure that is the case, or that we at least respond. We don't do radio silence and ignore it. Based on your 4 weeks, do you have any sense of what the practice is when someone's calling to find out the status of their case?
I don't know that I have a generalized feel of that. I'm sure that our handling attorneys respectfully reply to those types of inquiries if they come in. I don't know if they reach out specifically. There's probably going to be different feelings among handling attorneys about whether or not they need to reach out to somebody, and whether they can reach out with anything that matters. So to answer your question, I don't know. In 4 weeks, I don't really have a good feel, other than I know that we do respond.
That's the helpful part, is
Yeah.
that whether it's a process or at least there's a response. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Picking up on that point, I think we have had the situation come up previously where during public comment, it happened again today, folks are calling in because their cases have been sitting for some time, and they don't, what comes across to me is that they don't feel like anybody's paying attention to their case. So I would just say that in the past, the chief of enforcement has used that as an opportunity to reach out to that person. And to your point, I think that's a good thing. I think we need to keep doing that. I think that is part of the public service, customer service lens that we need to have. I mean, we work for the public, so we ought to be responsive to them when they take the time to file a complaint with us. I'm not saying to divulge inappropriate information, but certainly you should know that the practice has been for the chief to reach out and try to assure them, to the extent you're able to, that the complaint is being handled in the ordinary course, and we're doing the best we can, essentially.
Yeah, thank you for that. And in this particular instance, that's exactly what I would do. The handling attorney did respond last time, and that clearly was not satisfactory. And my intention would be to reach out also.
Thanks, Chief Lindsay. On Chief Lindsay's presentation or the Enforcement Division report? Chief Lindsay, any departing comments?
No, just thank you for your time.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good presentation. All right, next up is our Audit Division report. Chief Shaw.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My report this month is as submitted, but happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Chief Shaw?
Just a quick one, thank you. Do you have, I should probably have this memorized by now, when the next public draw, I know we just had one in August, does that mean, and this is a refresher
There will
course
be
for me.
one in November of this
Okay.
year, I believe. It should be on our
Okay.
website. I can look at the date and
Great.
verify.
This is a more internal, I think it'd be great to have that on the commissioner's calendar as like just send us a calendar invite so we already know. Sorry to have to be so managed for that, but my intent would be to get to attend and observe one of those. My calendar permit, I know I tried to do it in August and did not succeed, but that, I think if that's not a minor request, I'd be grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Any other question? Maybe not. They are. So
They are, yes.
They are. And I think they are being added to our calendar, if my recollection is correct. And no other questions for Chief Shaw? Any public comment on Chief Shaw's report? All right, thank you, Chief Shaw.
Thank you.
Mr. Bainbridge, Legal Division.
Yeah, just wanted to highlight, since it's taken up almost the whole first page of my report, all the webinars and workshops that our education group has been doing or did in August. Alex and Adam and Stephen and Katie and Chloe have all been working really hard, and they're not a group that the commission gets to see that often, but they are the face of the agency in a lot of ways, out there working with the public and providing these trainings. So since they did so many this month, I thought I'd give them a little bit of long overdue credit. And then the other thing I would mention that as a matter of course, we mention when there's an exemption given for SEI reporting. And we have one this month for a city council member down in Lancaster who also has a private law practice, and some of his clients, attorney-client privilege, prohibited from disclosing their identity. So we have granted him the exception he requested for his Form 700 on that. That's all.
Anything else? All right. Mr. Just let me ask, just so I make sure I'm remembering correctly. I know we had talked earlier in the year after we adopted the 84308 regs that you were going to come back at a meeting and identify at that point any feedback you had received on additional areas for inquiry for the commission. You're going to do that in October? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, that'll be at the October meeting.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure it was coming up.
Can you give us a short term, is that pay to play? Which, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I respect that you have the numbers memorized, but
Senate
I need words.
491 is the Glazier bill. All right, Commissioner Wilson.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to Council Bainbridge's report, I think a lot of the extraordinary work that the staff are doing is reflected on the website. If you have nothing better to do and you spend a couple hours just navigating through the website, there's a lot of very useful information. And while I might be biased in terms of other state agency websites, I think that FPPC's is very informative.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would encourage people to check out the education tab. There's a lot there. It may take a little bit of work to get through it and find what you're looking for, but there's a lot of good information, whether you like reading or you like videos or whatever. We try to put it out in different mediums for all types of learners.
And I just wanted to echo your kudos to Ms. Hackard and her team for their great job with the outreach and education. Any public comment on the Legal Division report? Hearing and seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Bainbridge. We'll move to Admin and Technology Division. Chief Hahn. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioner. I would like to submit the report as is, but I would like to provide a verbal update. The State Leadership Accountability Act was enacted in 2015 to reduce the waste of resources and strengthen internal control for all state agencies. The acronym is SLAA, require each of the state entity to submit a biannual report to Department of Finance to evaluate and monitor the effectiveness of internal controls and ongoing basis. FPPC have been submitting our biannual report beginning in 2017, which if you're interested, it's actually posted on our website under the tab. Department of Finance has identified the FPPC SLAA report as one of the top 8 report of 2021. Because of that, last week, FPPC staff were requested by the Governor Operation Governance Risk Management and Compliance Council, it's a mouthful, to participate and to host a breakout session to share our SLAA report process, tips, best practice, and provide a tour of the FPPC report with other state agencies. So I just want to give you that update that we've done that last week.
Excellent. Good work, Ms. Hahn. Appreciate it. And one thing I want to highlight this month is I noticed that we have 3 employees from your report who received promotions. And so one, I want to congratulate them on their promotions. But secondly, I think that is a good thing, that when we recognize that we have employees who are working hard, are doing an excellent job, that we find pathways for advancement for them here in the agency. Good job both in the enforcement division and legal in recognizing that and promoting those individuals. Any other questions for Chief Hahn? Nope. Any public comment on the Admin and Technology Division report? Hearing none. Thank you, Ms. Hahn. All right. Executive Director report, Ms. West.
Yes, I wanted to clarify something from earlier. We do not have a public mailers training, but in the candidate and treasurer training, there is a section about mass mailings and ads. So, just so you know. The more you know, right? I'm going to steal the slogan. Also, as everybody should know by now, we're going to have our meeting on October 19th in Fresno. So we'll be at the Fresno State Campus in the Gallery Library. The day before, we will be doing an informal roundtable with local agencies and officials, trying to gather information from them about issues that they have with the act or dealing with the FPPC or the ways that we can help them or things that they're interested in that we could partner with them on. So we'll be doing that roundtable the day before. And hopefully, make some Fresno friends. So that's the goal anyway. So we will see you all in Fresno on the 19th.
All right, great, thank you, Ms. West. I assume you will be giving the full commission an update after the day before's meeting about all the wonderful things that we've heard in terms of feedback from our.
I would love to.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to put that on your radar now. All right, any other questions or comments for Ms. West? All right. Is there any public comment on the executive director's update? Hearing and seeing none. Our last item, commissioner comments, proposed future agenda items. Do any commissioners have any comments? Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. I saw, this might be for Mr. Bainbridge, I saw in the education update, there's been a behest payment training and 4 people attended, so good for those 4 people. Part of our adoption of the behest payment changes, I think it was in 2021, it's a bit of a blur, where we brought more transparency to when elected officials are in some way directly involved in a nonprofit to whom they behest payments. And I wonder, I need a refresher on when we might have an update on how that's going, because it's been an amount of time now that we've had those new rules. I don't think we adopted them last year. I think they were the year before. I'm looking at my colleagues for better memory recollection. And that within a time frame, I think I might have even said it'll be interesting to see after we've had some practice for a year or two, what more reporting are we seeing? What's the prevalence of any trends or fact patterns? And I'm happy to get more specific. But ultimately where I'm going is, when might you anticipate that? And because that would be a future agenda item at a good time in the not too distant future, ideally, to have.
Yes, if memory serves, we did talk specifically about getting about a year out, getting an update on any trends. So, Mr. Bainbridge, is that something you think your staff can pull together for us?
Yeah, we'll put that on the to-do list. I have no idea when that was as well. It all blurs together. But we'll look at when that was, and I'll see what I can pull together from talking to various staff about what they've observed with Bethesda payments.
And it may have there have been some changes where we're seeing X number of officials are reporting that they are a staff member or spouse member, or not, it doesn't have to name names necessarily. I'll leave that to other people, but that we get a focus on the items that we were trying to bring more transparency to so we could see the prevalence at a minimum. I don't want to micromanage your report, but that is definitely something I would be interested in seeing.
Yeah, we'll see what we can find. I would just, we don't see all the Bethesda payment reports, obviously. We only receive a certain percentage of the ones, so a lot of them happen at the local level. So we'll put it on the list of things to ask when we're at the roundtable in Fresno, and then and maybe reach out to some other jurisdictions that see a lot of Bethesda payments and maybe get their impressions as well.
Yeah, and if I may, I think that's a great question to ask, is how aware are they of those, not only all the great trainings, help us help you kind of things that we make available, but they have those new matters, because it'd be interesting to hear. Thank you very much.
Any other commissioner comments, future agenda items? No? All right. That brings us to the conclusion of our meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All right, Ms. Contreras.
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wood?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next month from Fresno.